Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to The Strange Dominions. I am your host, Octavian Graves, and I am here with the Infernal Serpent himself.
Good evening.
Good evening. Tonight we speak with John Micheal Greer, author, magician, and druid. He has authored over 30 books on magic and at one time was the Archdruid of America. We speak on a range of topics from magic, druidry, the Golden Dawn, paganism, and the paranormal. I really enjoyed talking to him about paganism and druidry and its history and the differences between the different kinds of neo-pagan groups and practices that go on today.
He had a lot to say. Man's been practicing for, 60 years now?
Something like that, yes.
And he's definitely been around. He gave us a lot of insight on the Golden Dawn, his time spent with them, his takes on various forms of magic and other authors and practitioners across the decades.
I enjoyed his comparisons between druidry and the Golden Dawn and traditional ceremonial magic. I thought there was a lot of insight in that.
Yeah, and it was interesting to hear him talk about how there's not a whole lot left over from the Druids of old. There isn't really any text about that, and how
a lot of people want there to be.
Yeah. But his practice kind of dispels that and focuses more on growing new roots rather than digging up the old ones.
Yeah, he explained all that very, very cogently, and we're absolutely going to have him back on in the near future. So without further ado, just want to let you know, if you have seen something strange, unusual, paranormal, supernatural, such as Bigfoot, ghosts, aliens, or anything in between, send us an email at strangedominionspodcast@gmail.com. That is strangedominionspodcast@gmail.com. Our Patreon is up, and we will be doing episodes. We're going to try and do 2 episodes a month, but for right now, we'll just stick to 1. But the merchandise and add-ons for each tier are up, and so if you would be interested in getting extra content and supporting the show, that is the best way to do so. And without further ado, here is our interview with John Micheal Greer. We are talking to John Micheal Greer, author, magician, and druid. How are you doing, John?
Doing very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
It's a pleasure to have you. This is a special episode for me specifically because I've been into magic and the occult since I was a young boy, but I didn't really start practicing until about a year or so ago. And one of the first books that I actually got on the subject was Learning Ritual Magic, which you co-authored. And so that I've been kind of working through that system, and I've been really enjoying the meditations
I'm glad to hear that.
So where does magic start for you? How did you get into it? I mean, because you've been into it for a very long time.
It's been a few years now. I turned 60 this year.
Happy birthday.
I got involved in thank you. I got involved in magic in my teen years. We're thinking the mid-1970s. The occult revival was really kicking off. You could finally get decent books on the subject for the first time since the Great Depression. And I was a teenager. I was living in the South Seattle suburbs. Think of every cliche you can think of about suburbia. Boring is the essence of it. So I was desperately looking for anything that was more interesting than the one-dimensional, pseudo life that the media and my teachers and everyone else insisted I had to be satisfied with. So I was into unexplained phenomena. I was into cryptids. We didn't call them that yet, and a great many other things. But I ran across some books on magic, and I went, "Whoa, this is seriously cool." And one thing just kind of led to another from there. I found myself intrigued, fascinated, willing to put in the work, and I will be talking about that as we go. But as you've already learned yourself, magic's a lot of work. And over the years, there were, for a long time, I was purely a solitary practitioner, think geeky bookworm type, and gradually, eventually, I ended up making contact with some other people, working with some teachers, this kind of stuff, and of course, writing books.
Well, that's very similar to, I think, how a lot of people start out, especially in the modern age.
Oh yeah. It's It's not a matter of finding some mysterious temple somewhere in the distance, and or you like the whole Harry Potter nonsense. You find a book.
Well, the thing that I always wanted, and I was always kind of disappointed when I first got into magic, was I wanted to be able to go into the woods somewhere, find an old shack with an old wizard in it, and just learn all of his secrets and techniques myself. That soon became not a reality.
Yeah. Unfortunately, most of the old wizards are not living in shacks in the woods. They're living in rundown apartments in mid-sized cities because that's where the rent's cheap. Magic. I mean, you can make a decent living as a writer on magic, but there are various other day jobs. But if you're going to be an occultist, you're going to have a day job.
Yes, and both me and my co-host do have day jobs. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you go. You've made the first necessary step into dealing with the realities of the situation. Okay, good.
Yes, exactly. We try and take this from the most realistic standpoint possible.
Good.
So I was reading through some of your biography on different websites, and you were very involved in the lodge system, specifically the Golden Dawn. Is that correct?
Yeah, I got involved. The whole Golden Dawn end of things was complicated. When I first got involved in magic in the mid-1970s, the Golden Dawn was about the only thing you could do unless you wanted to do either Wicca or the works of Aleister Crowley, who I'm not a fan of his, and I'm not greatly into Wicca either. So Golden Dawn magic was what there was. But I was a solitary practitioner for many years, as I mentioned. Partly there were no Golden Dawn lodges that I knew of, no Golden Dawn temples, I should say, anywhere near me, and partly, I was not deeply into socializing and getting into the whole social whirlwind. I eventually got into lodges by way of fraternal lodges. I became a member of the Independent Order of Oddfellows. I became a member of the Grange. I became a Freemason. I learned an enormous amount about Golden Dawn magic kind of secondhand by learning all these ways that lodges do initiation rituals and other things like that, and saying, oh, that's what that Golden Dawn paper was talking about. Now I understand. Later on, I did get involved actually in several different Golden Dawn temples and Golden Dawn-ish temples. There's a lot of sort of spin-off from the core Golden Dawn, moving in various directions. But that was later. That was kind of. Well, it was after I really made a little more of a reputation for myself, started traveling around to events, and made contact with some people who were active in lodges.
Well, when I started, I had an interest in the Golden Dawn, and that partly because I used to be a very, very big fan of Crowley, just because as a teenage boy, as much of a bastard as he was the icon of rebellion, and I gravitated heavily.
Every teenage boy at some point desperately idolizes Aleister Crowley because he's the rebel, he gets laid, all this kind of stuff. The problem is he never really grew up beyond about the age of 16, and when the rest of us do, sooner or later it starts. The antics start getting dull.
Yes, no, I absolutely agree with that. But one of the things that I've always wondered about is because he was so intimately involved in the original Golden Dawn, the offshoots of the Golden Dawn, did you feel that there was any kind of Crowley influence that was still carried over into these offshoots?
It depends on which offshoots you're looking at. There's a lot of Crowleyan offshoots out there, or quasi-Crowleyan, or semi-Crowleyan, or a little bit of Crowley here and there. Then there are a lot of others that have reacted against that and have nothing to do with Crowley or anything, any of the work of the not so great beast. The ones that I got involved in were all the non-Crowley end of things because, again, I'm not a fan.
Right. And there's actually a lodge. There's a Thelemic lodge in Baltimore where we're from, and I haven't been to the events just because of the plague that has caused it very difficult to go to any of these places. But the thing that I had a hard time with was the thing that drew me to magic in the first place was the image of the magician in the robe, in the circle, with the triangle in front of him and a great dark spirit, and the magician commanding him.
Oh, I know, yeah.
And so that is kind of one of the things that my co-host and I have been working through. We're actually in a sort of a course like a 101 of very strict traditional Solomonic magic. And I'm just curious if you've had any kind of contact with this, or if you've done any kind of the traditional Goetic workings yourself, or what your opinion is on that.
No, I don't. Goetia never really interested me. When I was doing a lot of Golden Dawn work, I did a lot of evocation, of course, but I was mostly interested in evoking planetary intelligences and angels. I figure I want to work with positive energies. I want those energies in my life. I don't want the energies of demonic beings in my life. So, what you invoke is what you're going to resonate with. So this, and I kind of used up my interest in evocation at that point. I figured out what I could do with it, what I couldn't do with it, and so the Solomonic material, the other Goetic traditions, never really interested me. My focus is elsewhere,
and that's totally fair. And I think that for me specifically, and any of our listeners on the show will know that I've aired my grievances with monotheism quite a lot, and getting into the Solomonic magic, that was a roadblock that I had to kind of overcome to see if this stuff it really works. And so that kind of brings us into your druidic practices and druidry in general. And I'm very curious about this because I subscribe to the Norse heathenistic lifestyle. What would you say is the biggest difference between the Celtic Druid system and the Norse?
Well, it's partly it's simply cultural. Each culture, each traditional pantheon has its own flavor, its own sort of emotional tone, its own things that it focuses on, things that it doesn't focus on. I know that a lot of druids and a lot of heathens get along very well. And I mean, I've attended heathen rituals. As a polytheist, I have no problem attending rituals, celebrating gods that I don't happen to worship. It's one of the great advantages of not being a monotheist. You can get along with other deities, but really, it's more a matter of flavor and tone than anything else. I'm not a heathen. I don't. I have a respectful relationship with the Norse deities and the Germanic deities, but I don't actually work with them directly. But my experience has been the similarity. The differences are mostly a matter of cultural flavor and of the kind of people who are attracted to it. Your druid, your common or garden variety druid is going to be attracted to the sort of Celtic tradition. They're going to be attracted to the arts, to poetry and music. They're going to be attracted to nature-oriented stuff. That's that you think druid, what comes to mind? Besides people in white robes, walking around Stonehenge, it's stuff out in the woods and all this kind of thing. So you tend to get a certain kind of vibe, a certain kind of personality that's attracted to druidry. Whereas the Norse types, the heathens that I met, not so much into either there can be some interest in the poetry, but not so much into that, more into the moral values of Norse culture, more into a focus onto the mythology and the traditions of the culture. You could talk to any heathen and get a rundown there, but you could say the same thing with people who worship the Hellenic, the Greek gods, people who worship the Egyptian deities, and so on. It's a matter of flavor, really.
And I fully agree with you. The thing that I've always been curious about, because I have a copy of the Druid Handbook, and in that, in the beginning, you kind of trace out the origins of the modern Druid movement. And I guess I'm curious because within the Norse tradition, we have two sources. We have the Eddas, the poetic Edda and the prose Edda. And the issue with those two is that we don't know how reliable they are. We don't know the extent of how much sort of creative input there was by the authors, because the authors were most likely Christian. They probably weren't doing it as a fan of the Norse tradition. There was probably a bit of kind of like a hit piece almost on certain entities within. But those are our sources. Those are what we know of what the old beliefs were. And so is there anything like that within the Druid tradition? Is there any kind of very old source that people can draw from?
In terms of druidry, Okay, there's a complicated thing that a lot of people don't get, and I want to clarify that to start with. Many, many, many Americans think Celtic, and they immediately default to Irish. Okay, the Celts, broadly speaking, are divided into two subfamilies, two language subfamilies, two cultural subfamilies. There is the Godelic, which means Irish and Scots Highland and Manx, and there is the Brythonic, which is Welsh and Cornish and Breton. These are not the same thing. If you want to get involved in Irish Celtic religion, there's a certain amount of material, a fair amount of material that survived the Book of Evasions and so on. And it suffers from all the same problems you're dealing with the Eddas. It was written down by monks. It's not a matter of were they Christian. We know they were Christian. Monks, a bunch of Christian monks wrote this stuff down, and they put their own spin on it, and people have been debating that. But here's the thing. The Druid revival did not happen in Ireland or in any of the Godelic countries. It happened in Wales and England and Cornwall, a little later in Brittany. And so it's very much a Brythonic movement rather than a Godelic movement. Again, major difference here. The languages are as different as English and German. And so you have this sort of Welsh-themed, Brythonic-themed tradition, and all we have from that source is just fragments. We have the stories from the Mabinogion, which were, again, certainly written down by people in Christian times and are very strange and a peripheral connection to Druidry at all. We have just bits of folklore and so on. And so when the Druid revival got going back in the early 1800s, back in the early 1700s, let me get my facts right here. When it got started, we didn't have anything. There were no documents to get all quarrelsome about, or get into the Reconstructionist thing, or debate this or debate that. All we had was an image of human beings in harmony with the earth energies, in harmony with nature, in harmony with the gods as expressed through nature. And so we had to go back to first principles and just start invoking things and see who showed up. And so the revival Druidry, the revival tradition in Druidry, is not Reconstruction. It can't pretend to be. We don't know. Well, we know diddly squat about the ancient Druids. We really know very little. And so those of us who are honest about it, fess up. We don't have a connection to the ancient Druids. We're descended from a bunch of people about 300 years ago who said, "I want to do something that's not Christianity and not scientific atheism. I want to do something that is relevant to nature, that is a spirituality of the green natural world." And the Druids, the image of the Druid is my inspiration, and that's as far as we can go. And so revival Druidry that's one of the things that sets it apart from most of the other traditions in the sort of broad pagan revival. It doesn't pretend to be ancient. It may be inspired by the ancients, but we don't have a connection. We admit it. Ours is, if you will, an indigenous nature spirituality of modern British and British diaspora cultures like that of the United States.
And I would absolutely say that the situation with the Norse stuff is very similar. I think there's a lot of people who want to fantasize about the thing they're doing being a direct lineage from the Norse countries, and I feel the need to explain to them that we don't know. We have no real concrete understanding of what they practiced or what they did or anything like that. That ends up being a point of contention.
At least you've got the Eddas, but that's not much, I know.
And so within Druidry, do you feel that magic is an integral part of the Druid practice, or can you be a Druid and never touch anything magical in your life?
Okay, one of the basic rules of Druidry is if you ask 3 Druids, you'll get at least 5 different answers. Ours is most small religious groups are very diverse. Ours is insanely diverse. So there are Druids for whom magic is absolutely central to their practice. There are Druids who have never practiced magic at all. There's every flavor in between and some out to both sides. So it depends on which Druidry, and it depends on who you are and what you want to do. There's a lot of flexibility. We know that the ancient Druids were very widely known in the Greek and Roman cultures for practicing magic. They were good at it. How much, did any of that carry over? We have no way of knowing. There are Druids now who are very good mages. There are Druids now, of course, who are third-rate mages. That's the nature of things. And there are a lot of druids who don't practice magic at all.
And that's, I agree, and I think that's one thing that's always kind of attracted me to it, because I do have an interest in druidry. I have an interest in nature. I feel that I've always said that when I'm out in nature, I feel much more connected to something other than myself than I ever would in a synagogue or a church or anything like that. And so that is one thing I definitely have in common with any kind of spirit or nature-based system.
That is one of the most deeply rooted trends in American culture. It goes back to colonial times. There's this fascinating book, which some of our listeners might want to find. It's called Nature Religion in America by Catherine Albanese. And she goes into the entire history of nature spirituality in North America from colonial times up until the mid-20th century, and shows that it is this immense American tradition that most people don't think of, because you and me both, and enormous numbers of other people who want to get close to the divine, you don't go inside a building. You go out into the woods or onto into a meadow or wherever, whatever your local ecosystem has to provide. And that's really a centrally American kind of essence. And I think the future nature spirituality of North America, which is will come into being as it when the time is right. It's going to be very deeply rooted and very very rich, and I think very enriched by a lot of the traditions that are flowing into it now.
And I definitely agree with that. So within, I'm trying to think of how I want to put this. Within the Druid system, if someone did want to kind of mimic a Solomonic evocation but did not want to use the holy names of God or the barbarous names or things like that, is there a method to do so?
Okay, there are ways of evocation, but it depends on what you want to evoke. If you're going to be working with the goetic entities, you need to do it within the goetic framework.
Of course, yes, I agree with that.
If you're going to call someone on the telephone, you don't use an egg beater. Druids who practice magic do a lot with the elemental kingdoms for obvious reasons. We get along well with those, and there people think a lot of people in ceremonial magic think of elementals as these minor little beings, and that's because they don't deal with the powerful ones. Druids sometimes do. There are some very, very potent elemental intelligences, elemental forces, elemental kings, and you can get some remarkable results working with the elemental kingdoms, and that's something, again, Druids do, and there are ritual forms for doing it. I have some introductory material on that in my book, The Druid Magic Handbook. And although just very introductory, because again, there's actually something that was fairly common in a certain class of books on ceremonial magic back during the Renaissance, the early modern period. The idea was that grimoires aren't going to do you any good because the world of spirits is constantly changing, like our world. It's like getting, a phone book that's 50 years out of date. So that the idea was, and you'll find this in the Abramelin work, you'll find it in half a dozen of the others. The idea is not that you pick up some book and use the names and so on. Not that you make contact with your guardian genius or holy guardian angel. You receive from that being the names and powers of the spirits you should work with, and then you do that. And that's what struck me as a good idea. That way you're getting if you're working with your own guardian genius or your own holy guardian angel, whichever you want to call it, you're getting the access to the kinds of spirits that actually meet your own needs. And of course, the invocation of the holy guardian angel or guardian genius is the thing you should be doing first anyway.
So with that being said, and I actually do have an interest in the Abramelin. I don't think I could ever. I don't know if I would ever find myself in a position where I have 18 months to do constant rituals. But you can get the same effect by simply doing intensive rituals on a daily basis. In the midst of your daily life. Right. So within the Druid system, let's say that there was a specific elemental that I wanted to evoke. Can I evoke it into a physical form? And also, what are the actual ritual components of that? Instead of using the names of God and casting, having this thing come into a triangle, what does the operation look like?
Okay, the first thing is that you're not in a hostile relationship with the elemental kingdoms. You don't have to confine them in a triangle. You're not, fortifying yourself in this protective circle. You are doing, banishing rituals and the like to clarify the area. But if you want, you can call anything into visible appearance if you really want to. It's the hard way around. You can as well use a scrying mirror. You can as well use scrying in the spirit vision or any other of the standard methods. But it would be a matter of really establishing contact with the divine forces. The way I would do it is you establish a relationship with the divine forces governing that element, and then you work from the divinity who rules the element to the elemental king to the element. You're invoking and then calling upon and then evoking the actual elemental. You're doing it. You'll be using divine, the pagan divine names, but that's not the primary thing you're doing, because you're not trying to browbeat them. You're not trying to bully them into showing up. You're establishing yourself in a state of consciousness where you can resonate with that element by attuning to the divine force, and then you're already halfway into their realm. And then the two of you can meet and have a conversation. So it really does require developing more in the way of sensitivity to awareness of the non-physical realm, which is something Druids do a lot anyway. And then you work from there, interact with the being, and see what you can work out between the two of you. We don't command a lot. We request. We ask. We find out what are the parameters. It seems to work just fine. And so, but you were about to say something.
I actually had a question for you.
Go ahead.
In the comparison, in asking about the comparisons to Solomonic operations, as I've been reading more of the conjurations, I've noticed a lot of them are instructions on basically instructing the spirit to speak clearly and to appear recognizable. With your method, what do these entities appear like without that instruction appearing on their own?
It depends very much on how well you've developed your own psychic perceptions. Early on, I would do something and get like a shadowy presence, just a sort of dim, shadowy shape in the appropriate direction, and we'd have a conversation, and the shadowy shape would dissolve, and it would go do something. They're not as bizarre, at this point. It's much more clear. The images are not anything like as bizarre. We're not talking about a griffin with the head of a crow and the wings of a jackdaw and a scorpion's tail or anything like that, right. Or any of the other oddities. The type I'm talking about. These beings, they have no form in our sense. They don't have their bodies are not made of matter, and they take on an image in order to relate to us. Most of them, in my experience, the ones that I've worked with, either take on a more or less human form or an animal form. You've done this conjuration, and this what looks very much like a raven comes fluttering through the walls of the room and perches outside the banished space and speaks to you, and you have a conversation with the raven. And presuming that everything is entirely suitable, the raven goes, okay, flies off through the wall. It was not physically there, of course, but it's certainly quite visible.
That sounds... well, there are some goetic spirits that seem to appear in what they call aerial form, which seem to take the form of a raven or an owl or something like that. But a lot of the way that you're describing the druidic magical sense seems to pair up with certain angelic processes of basically petitioning an angel to come in and either invoking it into a mirror or a crystal, and just basically asking if you were worthy enough, if they could do this thing for you. I mean, do you see the parallels there?
Well, with angels, I mean, the whole worthy thing, that's more a matter of that's what you get from the hangover, and I mean this in the full alcoholic sense, the hangover from Christianity. It's not a matter of, oh Lord, I am not worthy, grovel, grovel. The thing is, every angel has a purpose in the cosmos. Every angel intends to fulfill that purpose, and if you get in touch with the right angel and you're saying, I need your help, this is the kind of thing you do, I want you to do it in this specific situation, you'll get the help you need, assuming that what you're doing is something that's morally acceptable. Don't try to talk an angel into doing something selfish or stupid. But yeah, it's not a matter of commanding. And the thing is, the same is true in my experience with like the planetary intelligences, who are well worth your while to evoke and communicate with. They are intelligences. They're smart, and they can teach you an enormous amount about the planetary energies, and they can also command the planetary spirits. So, no, you don't say, I command you by the name blah blah blah, and see, they're going to roll their eyes. Imagine doing that to a person. Okay, if the spirit of Mercury or the planetary intelligence of Mercury wants to do mercurial things, that's his job. That's what he does in the cosmos, and so
that's his office, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. You want to learn. You want to develop mercurial abilities. He's going, oh, do you? Let's talk, and away we go. So, yeah, the important thing in dealing with angels and dealing with planetary intelligence and dealing with elemental intelligences is choose the entity who wants to do what you want done. Choose the energy that naturally that's their work. Put yourself in tune with them, and you've got that energy flowing into your life. You need the mercurial force. Okay, the planetary intelligence of Mercury. That's what he's there for. You need to develop strength of will. The powers of fire are all about that, and it's as much a matter of your attuning yourself to their energy as it is anything else. Once you get that fire contact, the will is there, and then it's a matter of, whoa, I can do this. Then you do it.
See, that's fascinating, and I'm very interested in that, because one of my things that I have a problem with in a lot of modern magic is there doesn't seem to be a lot of practical application. It's more of a spiritual based program, and while I can understand that, and I do feel an interest in that, I'm curious about, in your opinion, like, does druidry and druidic magic that you perform, is it more on the spiritual side than the practical side, or is it an even keel of both?
It tends to be the druidical magic that I've encountered and that I work with in the systems that I've devised, because I've actually written several, tends to have more of a spiritual focus, although it has practical applications, because the biggest obstacle that each of us faces in becoming an effective magician is making contact with those spiritual dimensions of ourselves. That's the core of the work, to getting to the point where you can perceive the spiritual realms. You are in contact with your own higher spiritual aspect. You can bring the power through. At that point, the practical stuff is easy. But so many people think, oh well, it's spiritual. It just means it's impractical. And in fact, the correct use of spirituality is the most practical thing there is, because that's how you straighten out your life. That's how you straighten out your consciousness. That's how you develop the strength of will, the strength of imagination, and so on, that enables you to look at any other problem and go, oh, I can fix that thought, and you fix it. So Druid magic tends to be more focused on the spiritual precisely because that's the name of the game when it comes to becoming a powerful magician. In terms of practical magic, I mean, if you want practical magic, there are plenty of systems. After I finished my Golden Dawn work, after I finished some of the work that I did in druidry, I actually went around and did a range of other systems. I spent several years studying hoodoo, old-fashioned Southern root work, with a teacher in California. And I worked with radionics, I worked with Renaissance astrological magic, and many of these are very practical in nature. And so, but there's a lot out there if you want to, and if you want to actually, if you want to have systems that are practical in nature. Many of the ceremonial magic systems are not well suited for that these days. They do have a very spiritual focus because they recognize that that's core. But there are other systems out there. And there are systems of natural magic, there are systems of folk magic, and so on, that you can study and learn and get very good at and apply to practical needs if you need
to. So that that's of great interest to me, because I do see usefulness, and I do have an interest in the spiritual side as much as I do the practical side. My interest in the Solomonic tradition is to somewhat fulfill this lifelong desire to be able to call upon a spirit in front of me and have it do what I say. But one thing that I've kind of been searching for is, I see that there is a ceremonial system within Druid magic, and there's obviously the Christian ceremonial magic, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of ceremonial system within the Norse tradition. And I'm curious if you've ever come across this, or if you think it's even possible to devise a ceremonial system.
It's certainly possible.
Okay.
It's certainly possible. In fact, I know I several years ago, on my Dreamwidth journal, there were several of us were talking about things like that, and I had recently published my book, The Celtic Golden Dawn. And so they were going, well, what about, could you do this for heathens? And I said, of course you could do this for heathens, and proceeded to do a heathen lesser ritual of the pentagram, heathen middle pillar, heathen equivalent. Actually, a friend of mine did the heathen equivalent of the Rose Cross ritual, and then a heathen or a general pagan open and closing of the temple that you can convert to heathen use. And just there's actually a guy in upstate New York right now that I know who is busy elaborating this and developing it with the goal of coming up with a complete heathen Golden Dawn system, more or less parallel to my Celtic Golden Dawn. You can do that with, all you have to do is combine a solid knowledge of Golden Dawn magic with a solid knowledge of whatever system you want to convert it into, so you can swap out the Judeo-Christian ideas, swap in the necessary symbolism, and also the necessary cosmology, and make it work.
And that's very inspiring to me, because that is something I've been kind of searching for, and been very frustrated because so many of the pagans that I speak to and know of online, I'll say, all I want to do is bring a troll into physical manifestation in front of me, speak to it, and see what it can teach me. And they say, that's not possible. That's not what they did in the 700s. That's not what you're going to do now. And so I've kind of been very frustrated by that.
Tell me how. Next time you have somebody say that, ask them whether the people in the 700s used a computer or drove a car.
No, that's a very good point.
We are not living in the 700s. Nobody listening to this show right now is an early medieval Norseman or Norsewoman. Okay, we are all here and now. The world is a different place. And just as Norse tradition evolved, developed, changed over its history, it's still changing. There are still options. Yeah.
Next week, we're actually interviewing a time-traveling Jarl, so I'll have to ask him about that.
Definitely.
But no, that's a very good point, and that's something that I've echoed in many communities online. Is everyone's trying so hard to live up to this sort of almost pretend image in their head of what the Vikings were.
Oh God, yeah. Well, the problem is what they're doing is turning their faith into a society for religious anachronism. It's all role-playing game.
It's
I'm
LARPing.
going to pretend. It's LARPing. Yes, I guess say that now. You can tell that I got into this before LARP, but yeah, it's spiritual LARPing. None of you out there are Vikings. You're all 21st century Americans, or depending on whatever country you happen to live in at the moment, and you can never be anything else, no matter how hard you pretend. And the thing to do is not to go, oh, whoa, so all I can do is grovel as a miserable consumer or something like that. The goal is to say, okay, as a 21st century American or whatever, what kind of spirituality makes sense to me right now? If it involves worshiping the Aesir and the Vanir, great. They're still around. They haven't, they're not mired back in the 7th century. They're still doing stuff. So what are they doing now?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I want to ask you one more question about, specifically about magic, and then we're going to kind of get into the crux of what this podcast is all about. And to sum that up is basically trying to find the connections and bridging the gap between occult activities and various paranormal phenomena that people experience on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, yeah.
But before we get into that, when we talk about spirits and elementals and things like that, do you see them being as separate from each other? Like, do you believe that there are that the Goetic spirits interact with the elementals and the Norse spirits interact with the Goetic spirits? I mean, do you think that they all kind of exist together, or are they separate in some way?
Well, some of them do exist on different planes from others. I'm an old-fashioned occultist here. I have absorbed the old teaching about the material world being one of many planes of being. You got the material world, the etheric plane, which is the plane of life force, the astral plane, which is the plane of consciousness with form, and so on. There are 7 primary planes, and so on and so forth. You can learn this from any old book of occultism. And some beings, like we exist on several planes at once. Some other beings do. There are other planes who exist on other beings who exist on just one plane. But all of us exist in the same universe. So all of these spirits, all of these entities, all of these gods are in some kind of relation to one another. Now, crucial point here. We do not know how all those relationships work. We don't even know how most of those relationships work. Human beings are not that bright. And that's one of the reasons it's very useful to have these old traditions, because we can sort of put our thoughts together with traditional lore from earlier cultures and say, okay, well, this is how they saw the connections. Let's see how that works. But yeah, I think there is, the universe is a vast, complicated place, vaster or more complex than we can imagine. And it is full of many, many, many different kinds of beings. Some of them have physical bodies, some of them don't. And they all share the same universe. And that includes gods, that includes intelligence, it includes spirits, it includes trolls, it includes everything.
And I absolutely agree with you. And that's one of the best quotes that I've heard regarding this topic is that all the spirits are kind of like a mountain range. Yes, there's peaks and there's ones that seem to be separate from the other, but they're all part of the same range and they're all connected in some way.
Yeah, and the thing is, we are also part of the same geography. We may not be mountains, but we're all part of that same geographical process because human beings have spirits.
Yes.
We are spiritual beings who happen to have material bodies. So yeah.
So now we're going to get into the big part of this, and this is the part that we love talking about. In all the workings that you've had,
yes, go ahead.
In all the workings that you have had and done, have you ever encountered things that you couldn't quite explain, that weren't part of the plan as far as what you were trying to contact?
Oh, constantly. Again, the universe is more complex than we can understand. It routinely happens that things get weird. It routinely happens. You do magic for a particular purpose, let's say, and if you're good, and if you use divination religion or astrology or what have you, to make sure that you're in the flow with the cosmos at that time, you can get your results. But you may also get other strange things happening. You do an invocation of Mars, let's say, or a spirit of intelligence of Mars for some purpose or other, and then you go to the grocery store, and on the way there, the only cars that pass you are bright red. There are 5 of them. Of course, the color red and the number 5 are symbols of Mars. Why did that happen? Odd. You get voices saying strange things sometimes. You get just weird experiences. 6 weeks of really peculiar dreams. 3 of the dreams end up coming true later on. The world's a weird place.
And we've experienced that ourselves. But the thing you said about the Mars and the cars and 5, that rings true of a lot of things going on in the paranormal right now because of synchronicities. Synchronicities are a very hot topic.
I'm glad to hear that.
I don't know if you heard the show Hellier?
No.
Oh, you should really. If you watch anything on Amazon, I would highly. It's actually on YouTube.
I do not do the big slimy river. It's just to talk.
No, okay. I understand.
I know it's a silly prejudice of mine, but it is my prejudice.
Well, we have our own prejudice here because we will
Exactly.
We will never ever put this podcast on Twitter. There will never be a Strange Dominions Twitter account. For various reasons, but
for good and various reasons, I'm not on Twitter either. Although there's somebody who's apparently somebody has set up a JMG Twitter feed and takes each of my blog posts and links to them or something like that. Not me.
Okay. Well, Hellier's a really cool show because it deals with the Mothman prophecies and everything that was happening in West Virginia in that time, as well as the Alan Greenfield and the secret cipher of the Ufonauts and sort of the occult history of UFO sightings in America, specifically with Crowley and Lamb and Thelema and things like that.
Cool. Okay.
And so
this is interesting because I've read most of that. Of course, I read the Mothman prophecies like a year after the book first came out. And, it's cool stuff.
Well, I'm a big fan of John Micheal and a lot of his theories.
Are you? Excellent.
Oh,
excellent.
very much so.
Okay, I'm delighted to hear that. I have a book out on the UFO phenomenon, and I got a lot of rubbishing from ends of the UFO community for whom John Micheal is not quite the Antichrist, but no, it must, they must be, nuts and bolts spaceships from Zeta Reticuli. No. Micheal had it right. These things are not material.
No, not at all.
They can materialize, but his super spectrum theory remains one of the best description. It's not really an explanation; it's a description of what's going on, of one phase of what's going on, I should say.
And a lot of what he said about cryptids has been ringing true. One of the things that I've been working with, and some other people within our sphere has been working with, is the various parallels that the Bigfoot phenomena has with other folkloric archetypes, such as, there's a lot of Fae encounters that mirror Bigfoot encounters. There's a lot of ghost encounters that mirror Bigfoot activities, such as,
No, where are you located? Just roughly, what state?
Maryland, born and raised.
Oh, that's right. You're in Maryland. Okay, yeah. People say Bigfoot. I grew up in Seattle. I'm used to Sasquatch. I'm used to the probably an actual ape. But I know as you move away from the area where Sasquatches are to be found, you have all these other BHM, big hairy monsters, that don't act like apes and that behave in very strange, very paranormal ways.
And that touches on something that I've been kind of working through. Is I think there's a lot of people who want to say that it's either a big hairy ape in the woods, or it's an interdimensional being, or it's a fairy, but it's not all three. And I think that there are a lot of cases where people are seeing a big hairy ape, but there's also something that seems to look like it but is not acting like it at all. And so the two things I feel are working in tandem with each other, maybe not consciously, but they're part of the same thing. They're just different in their own ways.
Oh, well, it's like the UFO situation where you have a bunch of different phenomena that have been lumped together under this label UFO. And it's in the air. It's unidentified. Okay, we'll call it a UFO. But some of these things are paranormal, and from out of the super spectrum. And some of these things are Air Force tests of various stuff, and and so on and so forth. In the same way, what all these various critters that were the BHM, to use, who was it? Jerome? Oh, I forget the name now. Somebody was using the term BHM for them, big hairy monsters. And
I'm going to start using that now, though.
Yeah, it's a convenient one. But yeah, your BHM sightings, all they have in common is vaguely humanoid and furry. And there are some that they're like the Sasquatch, the typical Sasquatch of the Cascade Mountains in Washington and Oregon. It's almost certainly a relic population of Gigantopithecus, which was around just a few million years ago. But you go out from there and you start getting things that appear and disappear. The footprints begin in the snow from nowhere, walk for a mile and a half, and end.
Exactly.
You get these supernatural stench. I mean, Sasquatches do not smell good. They smell like large unwashed animals. Social primates too, so they smell as bad as the rest of us. But you get the skunk ape, for example.
Right.
I've never had any direct run-ins with the smell of a skunk ape, but I've talked to people who have it. Oh boy. And and you have these Sasquatch-like creatures. You have these BHMs that have no heads. They're the two eyes staring out from the chest. And you have all these these things are weird. And so there we're moving closer and closer into paranormality.
Exactly. And the thing that I've been trying to work through is basically, I'm sure you've seen a ghost show or a ghost movie where they're going into a location and they say that back in the 80s there were satanic rituals here and now the place is haunted. Okay, well, let's expand on that. What do these rituals have to do with this activity that is, by a lot of accounts, unrelated? But I feel that there is a heavy connection between occult activities and these very specific phenomena, and I do feel that there is a difference in activity based on what group and what system is being used. Have you ever had any kind of contact with this kind of stuff?
First of all, I'll say that kind of research is very useful. It's extremely useful because, not least, it will you'll be able to figure out what's going on from the basis of what the local paranormality is. But I have never had any. That's not quite true. Many years ago, when I was still at college back in those days, there was one of those really stupid neo-pagan rituals done by a whole bunch of people who had no idea what they were doing. They raised up this big cone of power and just let it go.
Yeah.
And then over the next 6 weeks, various odd things became visible, and people had these weird encounters with spooky specters of various kinds. And I had some kind of peripheral run-ins with them. I knew people. In fact, my girlfriend, then my wife now, was one of the people who saw one of the creepy creatures, and it was a wild kind of situation. So I know this kind of thing happens. I avoid the Satanist types. I avoid the people who dabble in negative magic. I just stay away from them. And to give them credit, they stay away from me. They probably think I have druid cooties or something.
I've noticed that seems to be a recurring theme with magicians that we've spoken to.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely a divide between the left-hand path types and everybody else.
And everybody, yeah, exactly. My reaction is, first of all, you don't want those cooties. You don't want the energies that these people have around. The second of all, if they're spending all their time hanging out with evil powers, they're going to be nasty people, even if they don't start out that way. Their morality is going to degrade, and they're going to become the kind of people who will mess you over. And I'll pass on that. I watched it happen. I watched people that I knew who've gotten deeper and deeper into this grubby magic, and they become grubby people. So yeah, you just stay away from them. But I have not had any situations where, for example, I've had to clean up an area that had noxious magic being done in it. I have encountered some places where there's been a lot of druid magic over a while, but that's nice. I can get along with the energies that unleashes, of course, and so on.
One of the things that we've been wanting to kind of experiment with is the idea that when, if we're out in the woods and we hear what could be described as Bigfoot activity around us, is there a sort of magical operation that we could do to get in contact with it in a way that isn't so terrifying, or learn from it in some way? Do you think that within Celtic magic and Druid magic, there could be a way to, for the person to do an operation, a magical ritual or something, and sort of reveal what is around them in the more strange and unseen realms?
That is a fascinating idea. I think it's possible. I don't know of anyone who's worked out that. You would have to start by developing your clairvoyant abilities, your capacity to perceive the spiritual realms. Excuse me. And that right there, of course, would do you a lot of good, because you'd be able to see what was going on the non-physical planes. And then it would be a matter of figuring out what kind of spiritual forces are at work behind these entities. These entities are reflecting into the material plane, and how you'd want to work with them. But it could be done. It would require a lot of experimentation, a lot of potentially risky experimentation, but it could be developed, I think.
We're very okay with the riskier operations. I think that's one thing that we're kind of right in, just jumping right into it with not much thought of risk and safety.
And on that note, though, something I wanted to ask you, as we've been having more and more discussions about spirits and with various magicians, one of the key things that stands out is that even the good-natured ones, like the planetary archangels, the ones that don't inherently desire to do you harm or to try to get away from your clutches, are still extremely dangerous. What, if any, are the potential risks in dealing with the entities that you do through druidic magic?
Well, first of all, don't try to push them around. Don't try to bully them. You will get zapped. But in my experience, it's like dealing with any other very powerful being. If you know what you're doing and are polite and cautious and don't be stupid, the risks are very minimal. I certainly have never had any problem. But the crucial thing is don't try to make them do something. Don't try to make them do things, and don't try to get them to do something that's in violation with their nature. And as long as you avoid those, there's no particular risk. I mean, as far as the angels, angels can fry you. Angels can, okay, you will not speak again, and you won't. You can read accounts of angels going back, whether it's in the Bible, whether it's in later volumes of angel lore. They're tough. You do know you cannot mess with them, and you don't want to try. Planetary intelligences and things like that, they can mess you over. They can slap the equivalent of a curse on you if you irritate them, and everything related to that planet will start going wrong for you.
Well, that's very good advice, and we're hoping that
do not annoy them.
Yeah,
do not annoy them.
I think that goes for any kind of system. Whatever you're working with, respect is key. Respect
and respect, a certain amount of humility, and a certain amount of a realization that these are beings with their own intentions. They do not exist to run errands for you. And they may ask something from you. They may ask you to do things. Angels are likely to tell you to clean up your act in this and the other way, and if you don't, you're not going to get any results. Planetary intelligences are simply going to want you to embody their planetary energy, but if you want to do that, you're in great shape. Okay, here again is the planetary intelligence of Mercury. You need to read these books and understand them.
Are there any on that point? Are there any offerings that are central to the Druid system with the planetary intelligence or with the elementals that is specific to them, or scents and incenses and things like that?
It's quite traditional to use incense. They like that, and angels don't take offerings. Angels just other than your own basically entering into harmony with the basic pattern of the universe, angels don't take offerings. Elementals and elemental intelligences, planetary intelligence, they like incense. It's a very traditional gift. It's something that has been used for them since ancient times, and so you do that. It's not like It's not like the Greek deities or so on, or the Norse ones, where you would pour some wine or ale or meat or what have you. They're more refined than that. They like the scent, but and no blood sacrifices ever. Those called the wrong kind of beings.
Yeah, no, yeah. I can absolutely agree with that.
That's one of the basic working rules that I learned early on. Fortunately, not the hard way, but yeah, no blood. Never. You don't go there.
Well, John, we really thank you for coming on and sharing all your wisdom with us. We have thoroughly enjoyed this talk, and we really want to have you back on very soon for our roundtable series and other just discussions on all things magic and druidry. So where can people find all your information?
Okay, you can find my website is www.ecosophia.net, ECOSOPHIA.net. I'm also on Dreamwidth, which is kind of a Facebook equivalent, but not Facebook. Thank you. But Dreamwidth, which is, and that's ecosophia.dreamwidth.org. I have a bookshop page on bookshop.org. That's John Micheal Greer at bookshop.org. Just punch in my name, you'll get me. And that's where you can get most of my books. I do have a sales page on Amazon, I'm sorry to say, but if that's the best you can do. But your local full-service bookstore will gladly order anything of mine.
Our local metaphysical shop has a good number of your books, actually.
I'm glad to hear that. That's let's see, Maryland. I may have been there. What's the shop?
The Crystal Fox. It's in Laurel, Maryland.
I have been there. It's
a great place.
I thought it was a very, very pleasant place. So yeah, any of our listeners who are within range of Laurel, get down there and buy a book.
Bye. Yes, please. I'm hoping to have some sort of partnership with them in their near future.
Cool.
We're definitely gonna have to have you back on because you live in Rhode Island, correct?
That's correct.
And so you are very close to our patron saint Lovecraft.
Ah, yes, I've actually been to his grave.
Okay, so that's a pilgrimage I really want to take.
Oh, you got to do it. Lovecraft. I've been a fan of H.P. Lovecraft for a very long time. In fact, I wrote a series of novels that are kind of building on the Cthulhu mythos.
I'd love to read those. I don't think I've even heard of those.
No, the Weird of Holly, my tentacle fiction. Punch me up on any good source of books. You will find that there's a bunch of them. I had fun.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to have you back on so we can kind of delve into that, because Lovecraft is a big topic for us. I look forward to it.
Oh, cool. I'll look forward to that.
Yeah. So thank you so much, John, and we are going to link all of your stuff in the description below, so you have a great night.
Okay. Yeah. Talk to you soon. Bye.
And that was our interview with John Micheal Greer. I really enjoyed talking to him, and I'm really excited to have him back on the show to talk more about druidry, paganism, magic, and Lovecraft.
I did as well. He is a wealth of information on the recent history of magic and how it has developed throughout our society.
Yes, he is. So that is our interview. I just want to let everyone know that we have our Patreon up, as I said in the beginning. 4 tiers of support starting at $4 a month. You get a sticker, a pin, and a patch. We are also going to be collaborating with Cacophonix for the soundtrack for the show, and that will come in the coming weeks. So, thank you so much, everybody, and you have a great night, and we'll see you again on The Strange Dominions.